Hi, I am Leroy Duswade for Exposure Box, and I'm here in Ealing Town Hall talking to Councillor Julian Bell, leader of Ealing Council. 6 days to go before the election and a few pertinent questions to ask him. Just going to release my inner Jeremy Paxman here and see what happens. You're a Labour leader. Where do you stand in the Labour, as far as Labour goes? Are you a Corbynite? Are you a quiet social democrat who's biding your time? Where do you sit in the overall scheme of things?
I'm a Labourite, and I've always been a firm believer in Labour as a broad church.
Okay.
I was John McDonnell's agent in 1997. First got John elected to Parliament. I've clearly been known for my moderate positions as well, so I hopefully straddle the broad church, and that's what we need to be, united as a Labour Party to get a Labour government, because that's the real challenge that the country and Ealing's facing.
Just following up on that point, where do you sit on the Brexit story? Are you a Remainer or a Leaver, or which way round? Which way would you go?
So, Ealing Labour, myself personally, we're firm Remainers. We all campaigned for Remain. All three of the Ealing MPs voted against triggering Article 50. Just in our full council meeting this last Tuesday, we passed a motion saying that the British people should have the final say on any Brexit deal. So we've been very, very clear. Incidentally, that's something that John McDonnell in the last week has also said he's not going to rule out. So we're not at odds with the leadership, and we're very, very clear that it will be devastating to the country if we leave, come out of the customs union, come out of the single market. We've got 30,000 EU citizens in Ealing. They all have a say in this local election. We're going to look after them.
But the leadership seems to be pretty Eurosceptic. Jeremy Corbyn seems to be pretty Eurosceptic to me. It's said that there's some of the state aid that the current Labour leadership, in the shape of John McDonnell and in Jeremy Corbyn, would like to bring in that will be against EU rules, and that is said to be what lies behind their Euroscepticism.
Well, I think it's clear that we've always said as the Labour Party that this is about jobs and employment and the economy. That's been our consistent position. We've also, and Jeremy has made this clear in the last few months, that he and the party are in favour of a customs union of some sort, which is similar to what we've got now, in order to protect jobs and the economy. As I've said, John McDonnell has not ruled out a second referendum. We'd prefer a general election and to, again put these questions to the British people, because I know what the people of Ealing think. They were nearly 70% Remain, or over 70% Remain in some parts, and over 60% across the borough.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to some local issues if we can. You've been a long-time supporter of a safe zone outside the Marie Stopes Clinic, and as I understand it, a unanimous vote was passed by the council to put that into effect. But somebody, we don't quite know who, has now mounted a High Court protest. Is that correct?
Well, they're saying that they are going to. They sent us as the council a pre-action letter, but that was even before we'd made the cabinet decision a couple of weeks ago. So they were slightly premature in sending that. We're told that they would make a legal challenge by the end of this week. As of yesterday, I'd not heard anything coming to the council confirming that. But I think it's fair to say that it's probable.
Why would they do that? What is the purpose?
I'm not sure, because actually I think we've got a workable solution, and I've been popping along to Mattock Lane throughout this last week to check on how the proposed safe zone and the designated area, which is over 100 metres away, is working. And apart from one protester on freedom to express his views on Monday morning when we first implemented the zone, people have actually abided by the safe zone and continued to do their vigil and offer counselling in the designated zone. We think that's a good solution. It was supported by over 80% of local people who took part in the consultation. So I think that it would be unnecessary legal wrangling and expense.
You've had 16 years on the council, if I've done my maths right. Is that correct?
That's correct. I was first elected in 2002.
All right. And one of your long-standing focuses has been the regeneration of Ealing. What have you got to say? How do you see that going forward? What are your plans?
Well, I think we've just been talking about Brexit, and clearly London and Ealing is going to be hit by Brexit if it happens. I hope it doesn't, but I think the likelihood is it will. And so I think we need to give a clear message that Ealing's open for business, and also that we take advantage of the 5 Crossrail stations that we've got. When Crossrail opens at the end of 2019, I think Ealing's going to be probably the best connected place almost in the world. Essentially we will become an inner London borough for travel times, but an outer London borough for quality of life. So, we're in a great position. We need to take advantage of that, because local government finance is changing. We're going to have our funds coming from business rates, and if we can grow our business rates, that's going to help us deal with the continuing austerity and cuts that are coming from the government. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is that local people need jobs, and as good at paying jobs as possible, because again there's a downside to Crossrail in that the house prices and the affordability of living in Ealing becomes ever more difficult, and so you need to get your residents well paid jobs. So we want to invest in affordable and genuinely affordable homes as well. So that's
invest in what way? Is it directly built by the council, or through housing associations? How would you do that?
Well, Jeremy Corbyn last week, along with John Healy, our shadow housing spokesperson, launched a green paper and a set of proposals to kind of really boost genuinely affordable homes. Now that means taking away the housing revenue account borrowing cap that limits councils to building hundreds of homes rather than the thousands that are needed. Jeremy also talked about freezing the right to buy, because at the moment, if we build council homes, there's that right to buy, and then we lose those council homes. We've come up with innovative ways of building more affordable homes as a council through what we call our council-owned company called Broadway Living. We actually are able to borrow through our general fund in order to build homes which belong to the council. We can sell some of them to cross-subsidise.
Broadway Living is a housing association, is it?
That's a council-owned company.
Okay.
So it's solely owned by Ealing Council. And what that allows us to do is borrow money on our general fund.
Yeah.
And we effectively act as a developer or in partnership with developers to build homes, some of which are for sale, and the ones that are for sale cross-subsidise those at a social rent. And we've been very successful at that. We're just upscaling that in order to borrow another 60-odd million pounds in order to build about 700 homes across the borough. But we need thousands of homes, not hundreds. So we need a Labour government.
May I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
Do you own your own house?
I do.
I'm pretty sure Jeremy Corbyn does. You know John McDonnell better than I do. I'm sure he does. Isn't the problem with the Labour policy, as it's now being outlined by the leadership, that they're not in favour of private ownership? That the precise reason for limiting the right to buy is that ideologically speaking, what they want to see is more houses for rent owned publicly. Isn't that the fact? And isn't the truth that most young people, whilst being, their gripe is that they are, as it were, unable to access the housing ladder, they can't buy. So what I'm asking you really, isn't this a kind of 1950s policy in a 2020 world?
Well, I think that generation rent, and I've got my own daughters who are privately renting, and I'm the guarantor, and I kind of understand all of the kind of challenges and extortionate rents that young people are having to pay. And what we need to address is some of the issues around the affordability of renting in the private sector as well. And Jeremy's been clear about that in terms of clamping down on rogue landlords. We've introduced a licensing scheme for private landlords in the borough. We would like to extend it right across the borough, but the Tory government won't let us. There are extortionate fees that these letting agencies are charging private renters. And we will work with Sadiq Khan, the Labour Mayor, to see if we can have a lettings agency that's publicly owned and operated to get rid of some of these exploitative practices within the private rented sector. Clearly, as owning your own home becomes increasingly out of reach of people, particularly in places like Ealing, we need to have more rented properties that are genuinely affordable.
But isn't the real issue to build houses that people, that are affordable? I mean, there are methods of doing this. There is a lot of new prefabricated housing that's being built. Is there any plan here within Ealing to do something like that, so that we're not simply talking about the resale of Victorian houses, but are genuinely building stuff that people might be able to afford?
So, as I say, we're working with various developers to see if there's more opportunities for genuinely affordable private rented properties, and also genuinely affordable properties to buy. So there's a developer called Pocket Living, clues in the name, very small single bedroom properties, not quite Harry Potter under the stairs when you look at them. They're actually very nice properties. Now, they put a cap on the income that they want, that they will sell to.
Okay.
So, they did a development in Southall for us, and the average income, and these are joint incomes of people buying those properties to get a foot on the ladder, was about 40,000. So now they tell me that's the cheapest they've ever done, and they're currently building a development in Southampton. But they won't allow any sales to people who are just wanting to rent them on to others. They have to go to people below a certain income threshold, and they have to be genuine renters, and they have to prove that year after year. They can't rent them out to others and be absentee landlords. So there are ways of doing this, and we're very, very keen as a council to be innovative and look at ways that we can try to get genuinely affordable homes. So we've got a target in the next 4 years to build 2,500 genuinely affordable homes, and that's at social council rents or the London living rent, which ties rental levels to people's average earnings within a particular area.
Can I ask you about crime? Knife crime. Given the amount of publicity it's had, it must be something that concerns you.
Well, it has been a problem in Ealing. We've had some tragic deaths and in all parts of the borough. So in my ward in Greenford Broadway, my residents have set up a group, Lives Instead of Knives, and I've Ealing, like it stands for. They had a young man about 2 years ago now who was stabbed fatally and lost his life. Now that's had a traumatic impact on all those youngsters on that estate in my ward, and even bigger impact and tragedy on the young man's family. And I'm afraid this has happened in other parts of the borough, and for me, again for Ealing Labour, this is one of our key pledges to tackle knife crime. I attended the knife crime summit that the Mayor and the Home Secretary and Cressida Dick, the Met Commissioner, attended a couple of weeks ago. I've had frequent conversations with the Borough Commander about how we can all work together to tackle this scourge.
How do you take the view that a lack of police is part of the story?
I think it's inevitably part of the story. So yes, and again, one of our pledges for the next 4 years is that we are going to campaign for more police officers on the streets. I think that's where monies need to be put, and cutting the Met budget by the 600,000 that it's been cut inevitably has an impact. Now it's not the whole solution just to put money in. I think there has to be a long-term, 10-year strategy. We have to look to places like Glasgow, where working with public health, addressing the mental health issues.
Yes.
Around knife crime, looking at working with our schools more closely, working with those families who we're already working with as a council, troubled families, and trying to cut this off at source and look for those preventative measures to stop young people carrying knives and using them.
But how is that consistent with closing 2 police stations? So I understand that there's about a third of a million people in Ealing. It's now 1 police station. And one of those police stations, I think it was Ealing and Southall, that have been closed, isn't that correct? One of them was on the recommendation of MOPAC, which is the Mayor's Office about Policing, isn't it? Isn't that basically the story? So how does that fit together with this?
Well, first thing to say is I don't think the Mayor or myself or any of the Labour politicians in Ealing or across London are happy with the fact that police stations are having to be closed.
Okay.
And the root cause of that is the Tory government's cuts, the 600 million. If you add the previous cuts, it's actually £1 billion that's been cut out, or will have been cut out of the Met in the last 10 years. So that's putting the Mayor in between a rock and a hard place. And what he's chosen to do is put the money into getting officers onto the streets. And I think, where you're having, swinging cuts to your budgets, and I think it's reckless and it's wrong, and the government needs to reverse it. But faced with the reality of that, you've got to put your money into officers and not buildings. Now in Ealing, at the moment, we will keep the use of Ealing and Southall for at least a couple of years, and so at the moment it's only the closure of those public counters where people can report crime. The police are still occupying those buildings, and they tell me they will be for a couple of years. And we'll continue to keep campaigning for more money to be put in to policing. But the priority is to get more officers out on the beat.
Can I ask you about the building we're in, the Ealing Town Hall, as I understand it, the Victoria Hall was paid for, which is part of this building, was paid for at the end of the 19th century with public donations under the explicit premise that it would be available for public functions. Now it's, as I understand it, has been handed over or sold off for use as a boutique hotel. If it was paid for originally and with that explicit idea, how is that okay? How is that acceptable that this public amenity should now be turned into a hotel?
That is not what's happening.
Okay.
What I would say is that what we've done and the deal that we've worked out with Marscraft, actually, who were the hotel people, is that we have secured the future of Ealing Town Hall as the civic heart of the borough for the next 100 years or more. And again, it's about investing in people, not buildings. But we've managed to square it so that we've got an investment in both people and buildings now. But it's not the council taxpayer that's going to pay this. Now, currently, it's costing the council upwards to around £750,000 to keep this building maintained and operated each year. Basically, what will happen is that the east wing, which is where the council chamber is, will continue to be the civic offices, an area where all of our democratic functions will take place, and the council will still operate from that part of the building. The council will continue to have the freehold of the whole building. The hotel will be in the middle of the building. That's behind the facade. It's not listed. It's a bit of a dog's breakfast of add-ons over many, many years. And the west side of the council, where Victoria Hall is, that will be operated by the hotel. However, we have written into the lease guarantees that there will be both free access so many days a year for the council, and also that the current community discounted rates for any of those building rooms, including the Victoria Hall, which are booked by local groups, those community rates will stay, and we will have a say over them as the council to make sure that they are not put up in any excessive way, and that they remain, those rooms remain accessible for the public for the original purpose that you pointed out.
I want to move on to a very specific issue, which is the cafe in Walpole Park, which you'll know about. As I understand it, Alan Dillon, who created a cafe there called Spencer's, and there was none before. And for 10 years, he's had this business, which he's now losing because the trustees of Pitsanger Abbey, I think this is correct, you are one of whom is you, is that correct?
Correct.
Have awarded it to somebody else. Now, you're a champion of local residents, and yet you've gone outside of the borough to find someone to run this. Why was that done?
Well, let's be clear, Mr. Dillon's from outside of the borough.
All right.
As well. Yes, he's built up his business here in Walpole Park, and nobody's taking that away from him in terms of recognising what he's done.
Yeah.
However, there is a process, a tendering process.
Yeah.
It's a competitive tendering process, and that has been gone through, and unfortunately for Mr. Dillon, he's not won out in that tendering process.
There's the concern here is that Alex Head, who is the owner, I believe, or the chief executive of Social Pantry, which is the company that's taking over, is a friend, at least we know, through social networks, of the son of Sir Sherald Cowper-Coles, who's the chairman of the trustees. And that doesn't look good, does it?
Well, the trust have put out a clear statement as to the process that was gone through. Equally, I've sent a letter out that's in the public domain from my perspective as the leader of the council and as a member of the trust, that the process was fair and that the declaration of interest was made by Sir Sherard Cooper-Coles, and that he was not part of the decision. So
you knew before you voted on it that his family and the family of the person who owns this were connected?
Sir Sherard declared that interest and recused himself from the vote, and equally there was an initial part of and where the bulk of the tendering decisions and process took place was within a subcommittee of the trust, the catering subcommittee.
Yeah.
I am not a member of that.
But did they know?
Sherard Cooper-Coles is not a member of that.
But did they know?
And they basically brought a recommendation to.
But did they know? What I'm asking is, before that they took their vote, did they know there was a connection?
So, when that decision was brought by them to the full committee, that's the bit where I know that Sherard made his declaration and the committee and recused himself from that decision to make the decision.
So it had gone through to the subcommittee without him having said he had an interest?
I didn't say that.
Oh, okay.
I didn't say that. I said I don't know.
Okay, so but you're not aware of him having recused himself before it came to the action?
The statement from the trust and my letter is very clear that he's not a member of the catering committee.
How did they find out that it was available?
He didn't take part.
But how did they find out it was available? I mean, how would they have known that as I understand it, there's an interior cafe and an exterior cafe, and they've now been given both of them. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And how did they know that this was going to be available? I mean, this place is operating successfully, apparently, and now were they aware?
Well, it was a public procurement. It was.
What I'm really asking.
It was well advertised. We had quite a lot of interest in it, and so I don't think that there's anything at all.
Do you think it looks good?
Well,
the optics, are they good in a situation like this?
I think it's clear that there was no not following the procedures, and I'm satisfied that this was done in a proper way, and that there was not anything that was not done in the proper way. Declarations of interest were made, and Sherard recused himself from the decision-making process.
So, at the point at which you voted, you knew he had, which you voted on it, he had recused himself from
Absolutely.
it. But not as far as but you don't know whether he had at the original subcommittee stage.
Well, he wasn't. What I do know is that he's not He's not on that committee. I'm not on it either, and so he wasn't part of that process. So I assume that the committee didn't. They were not aware.
Now we're going to cut something really local. As we sit here, there's a massive sort of temporary construction out there saying Filmworks outside there, and I believe that's a cinema over there, and the local population quite like to go to the movies. So when's it going to open? Do you know what's happening there?
And of course, the irony is that Ealing is known for its cinema, for the Ealing comedies, for the Ealing Film Studios, the longest continuing operating film studios in the world. So it's deeply ironic and angering, frankly, that we don't have a cinema in Ealing. So as leader of the council, I've been fighting continuously, and I'm afraid it's been a long and difficult and tortuous battle to get the cinema rebuilt. Now, we had to go through the process of getting a compulsory purchase order, which again is a lengthy process, and had to have the Secretary of State's approval in the end, but we managed to get the cinema site from Empire Cinemas, who had basically had problems with Irish banks and left the site as a building site after they knocked it down in 2008, and then done nothing to it. So we eventually got it back in about 2013, I think it was, 14. We've then had another kind of part of the saga, in that the original developer partner, Land Securities, didn't want to keep the site and didn't want to build the cinema, so they then sold it on to St George, part of the Berkeley Group, and we began works at the end of 2016, and then St George put in some amendments to the planning, which took a bit of time, and then we, unfortunately, in the autumn of last year, had an application to the courts for a judicial review of that planning amendment decision.
By whom?
This is by the developers and owners of the building across the road next to the cinema. I can't remember their name right now, but again...
why would they do that?
Goodness knows. They certainly weren't going to endear themselves to me or the people of Ealing by doing that. And frankly, I was furious, because what that meant is St George stopped demolishing some of the buildings that are part of the site. So they demolished Flavours Bar on Mattick Lane, but there's an office block called Walpole House, a red brick office block, and they were due to knock that down last autumn, and they stopped when this JR came in. I had these people come in and I kind of thumped the table and said, this is ridiculous. I don't quite know what your objective is here, but you know, if you want to annoy the people of Ealing and myself as the leader of the council, then you know, keep doing what you're doing, but I advise you to stop. They then had a right of appeal. Unfortunately, I think our strong words persuaded them not to appeal. So at the beginning of this year, that judicial review threat dissipated, and St George have now been able to continue with the demolition works. So if you go down onto Mattick Lane... So
when do you think there might be a cinema there?
Well, this delay with this threat of a JR has unfortunately extended the build-out period. So we're now looking at quarter 3 in 2020. So
about 2.5 years.
Unfortunately, yes. So it's extremely frustrating, I have to say.
But there are no more impediments that you can see?
Well, touch wood, no. But I'd said that before. So, and then this JR threat came along. So, but yes, I think we're on the road.
Does it get to a point though where, you know, people cannot endlessly coming in and applying for judicial reviews, or is that just an open thing for, you know, the entirety of a project? I mean, there must be a point where the decision is settled and there's nothing more that can be done.
And I think we've reached that point now.
Okay.
But like I say, I've said that before. But I'm pretty confident, actually.
Julian, Councillor Bell, thank you very, very much. It's been absolutely fascinating.